The transition from the old age to the new one was violent, and reshaped the borders of the whole known world to some degree. The most major changes were France being beaten back on all fronts by minor German states, Denmark moving further north in search of control of that region, the Philippopolis Federation losing control of many provinces far afield, and the Faroukzadids fleeing to Arabia proper as a result of the most significant of these changes, the Timurid Revolt. The Maturids once held all of the land in that region, but, faced with extinction, the local Muslims rose up in revolt, taking up the mantle of Timur the Lame and exploding out into Central Asia. At the turn of a new age, it indeed seemed as though Islam had a beating heart once again. In November, Emperor Alistair X Monad recovered from his malarial fit and left the crusade for home. The 13th Crusade would be a failure upon his departure. Having been exposed to various soldiers of the European nations, he declared that the empires of France, Denmark, and the Krakow Federation were official enemies and rivals of Vannonia, given the strife that he suffered in their presence. Some attributed this sudden rage to an amount of damage to his head, suffered while in the Dark Continent or during his disease. That same year, due to his grand dream, he began plans for research into exploration, not by land, but by sea. Later that year, the Krakow Federation met in their capital to discuss the threat of the Magyars, who were overcoming the Philippopolis Federation and would soon move north against them. They decided to centralize their power, foregoing any distinctions between the member groups and becoming a single nation of people, thus becoming the Kingdom of Poland under their king, Kresimir Gorski. In 1445, in an attempt to posture itself against these now officially declared rivals, Vannonia accepted alliances from Lombardia, Occitania, and the Burgos Federation, creating a formidable military arrangement against its enemies. The three empires also exchanged several royal marriages in the early years of their alliance. Never before in European history had kingdoms so firmly drawn their lines in the sand, announcing to the world that they were standing together against others who were making similar claims with their neighbors. Some would say that this was the birth of modern diplomacy, a system that would rule the day for centuries to come. France, Denmark, and Poland came together to react to this decree and formed their own alliance, thus splitting Europe between the alliances. Meanwhile, on the 18th of October 1445, Emperor Alistair X Monad, called the Bear, died of natural causes, and his inept, imbecile daughter, Annabel Monad, became the first legitimately succeeded Empress of Vannonia, leading to unrest across the realm, especially amongst the High Lords of Vannin. Duly censored by her father, not only were they powerless to stop him, but now they were faced with rule by a simpleton, defended by the vast armies of the Empire that reported directly to her, or rather, directly to the generals that her father appointed. The High Lords of Vannin therefore began holding regular parties, in part for social leisure, but truly to sow enmity amongst the noble families of the Empire, hoping to, by slow and quiet conversation, turn them against the crown that weighed so heavy on its people. The High Lords, who had lost their title of kings, were split on this matter. The High Lord of Sotson, under Henry Longshanks Thorne, and Halby, under Hugh MacLandig, were the most dedicated Sixers, while the High Lords of Nairn, under Owen Maguire, and Rank, under Argaunt IV Gorkuf, were disgusted by talk of treason or open rebellion, and were in favor of intrigue and fixing the Empire's problems from within via intrigue and blood. Regardless, Empress Annabel was not a volatile woman, and there was not much to fear from her. She was, however, enraptured by birds, and ordered exploratory efforts to continue in hopes of finding more birds. Meanwhile, the first war of this new age was waged by the Burgos Federation upon their rival on the peninsula, Isbilia, in order to take parts of the Maghreb back from them. While that raged, the rank-born Guillaume Dauphin began his work as a famous Vannin artist in 1446, gaining the attention of the Empress by painting many kinds of birds and distracting the people from their worries about the new monarch, becoming the court painter. Later that year, wishing to embarrass her enemies and prove that she wasn't entirely unaware of the world she lived in, the Empress declared war upon France. That same year, she was struck by a bout of insanity, leading the High Lords of Vannin to request a regency, perhaps headed up by one of their own, or a member of the upper aristocracy. Before they could make their move, however, the armies of the Empire got to Chashtal first, declaring that the Empress was being advised by a council of commanders at the heights of the armies. Meanwhile, a war was still on, and so 44,000 men sailed to France with total subjugation in mind. Early victories were made, but by August 1447 the troops were mired down in the French countryside as the enemy launched a counterattack. Reminded of her ancestors, the Mad Empress Annabelle commanded a direct siege of Paris. Astonishingly, 271 days later in 1448, Paris fell, succumbing to disease and hunger. The triumphant 40,000-man army then marched to the coastal province of Picardy, where a French army of 14,000 soldiers were attempting a rapid siege. These Frenchmen, defying all odds, repelled the 40,000 men and began to march towards Paris. Luckily, despite apparently having a consort of angels guiding their blades, the army occupying Paris was much too difficult for the French to unseat, and so they conceded defeat on the 23rd of May, 1448. The terms that France agreed to were that they had to pay war reparations in the form of 10% of its income for 10 years, and give up its claims on Normandy and Picardy, preventing future war. In 1450, a policy of improving the countryside was adopted, the commanders of the armies beginning with the construction of 2 castles on the Vannin border with France, something that was in their own best interest. Later, after the 3rd French spy was caught in 4 months infiltrating the building sites for the border castles, Vannonia decided to begin its own program of espionage in 1453, even if only to spite the French. In 1460, Occitania cut off its alliance with Vannonia, the given reason being that it felt like it was a subservient member of the alliance, wanting to dictate its own policy on its own terms. The true fear behind this, however, at least according to many Vannonian speculators, was that the monarchy of Occitania had the blood of the dragon in its veins, and wanted to avoid slipping under the power of the Monad family on the Isles. This was proven to be a legitimate concern of theirs when they officially changed the name of their royal house to Monaton, an Occitanianized version of the Monad surname. This irrational fear would affect relations between the two empires, and if not strain it, it would definitely complicate it. On the 7th of August, 1474, a large ship, called the Triumph, was sent out to explore the uncharted parts of the North Atlantic, and upon hearing the news, Empress Annabelle died of excitement, leaving Emperor Demon Monad to rise to the throne. The captain of the Triumph was a man named Captain Guido Berenguer, born on the French coast in the region of Rank. He was old enough at 63 that this could very well have been his final voyage. Indeed, he could not have understood when those sails unfurled, bearing the golden dragon of the Empire of Vannonia, that this final trip was also the only one that would truly matter.